Hello and welcome to Cozy Mysteries by the Fireside, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. It was one of those bleak December evenings in London when the fog clung to the cobblestones like a living thing, and the gas lamps flickered uncertainly against the gathering dark. I, Dr. John Watson, late of the Afghan campaign, had just settled into my armchair at 221B Baker Street with a medical journal when my friend, Sherlock Holmes, threw down his violin with a sigh. "Watson," said he, "this infernal inactivity will be the death of me. The criminal classes have grown lazy." No sooner had he spoken than Mrs. Hudson announced a visitor. The door opened to reveal a gentleman of about 50, well-dressed but pale and agitated, his top hat clutched tightly in gloved hands. His eyes darted about the room as though expecting pursuit. Chapter 1. The Shadow on the Cobblestones. It was one of those bleak December evenings in London when the fog seemed to possess a life of its own, thick and yellow, pressing against the windows of 221B Baker Street as though eager to enter and smother the very fire in the grate. The gas lamps outside flickered uncertainly, their halos blurred into mere suggestions of light, and the muffled clatter of hansom cabs on the wet cobblestones below sounded distant, almost dreamlike. I, Dr. John Watson, lately returned from the Afghan campaign and still adjusting to the quieter rhythms of civilian life, had settled into my armchair with a copy of the Lancet, hoping its familiar pages might distract me from the persistent ache in my old wound whenever the weather turned damp. Across the room, Sherlock Holmes lay stretched upon the sofa, his long, thin form enveloped in a dressing gown of mouse-colored velvet. He had been silent for hours, his sharp profile turned toward the ceiling, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. A half-smoked pipe lay forgotten on the table beside him, and the air was heavy with the lingering scent of his strong shag tobacco. From time to time he would emit a sigh of profound boredom, each one more theatrical than the last. "Watson," he said at length, his voice cutting through the quiet like a scalpel, "this infernal inactivity will be the death of me. The criminal classes have grown indolent. Not a single interesting problem has presented itself in weeks. Even the most commonplace burglary would be preferable to the stagnation." I lowered my journal and regarded him with a mixture of amusement and exasperation that had become habitual. "My dear Holmes," I replied, "not every day can bring a fresh sensation. London is a vast city, yet even here there are intervals of calm." He gave a short, mirthless laugh. "Calm? The calm before some greater storm, perhaps. Mark my words, Watson, something is brewing beneath this fog." As if in answer to his prophecy, there came a sharp ring at the bell, followed by the measured tread of Mrs. Hudson upon the stairs. Our worthy landlady appeared at the door, her face betraying a slight unease. "A gentleman to see Mr. Holmes," she announced. "He would not give his name, but he seems most agitated. I have shown him into the sitting room below." Holmes sprang to his feet with the sudden energy of a hound catching a scent. "Excellent! Show him up at once, Mrs. Hudson. Watson, if you would be so good as to take notes." Moments later, our visitor was ushered in. He was a man of perhaps 50 years, tall and well-built, dressed with the quiet elegance of the professional classes. A dark frock coat, perfectly tied cravat, and kid gloves that he clutched tightly in one hand as though they were a lifeline. His top hat he held in the other. Yet for all the correctness of his attire, his face told a different story. It was pale to the point of pallor, the eyes wide and restless, darting about the room as though expecting some unseen pursuer to materialize from the shadows. A fine dew of perspiration glistened upon his brow despite the chill of the evening. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he asked, his voice cultivated but trembling at the edges. "At your service, sir," replied my friend, indicating the basket chair opposite his own. "Pray take a seat by the fire. You appear to have endured a trying experience. Watson, perhaps a drop of brandy?" Our visitor shook his head impatiently and sank into the chair. "No, thank you. Time is of the essence. My name is Sir Reginald Hargrove. I am a barrister of Lincoln's Inn, known perhaps in certain legal circles. But I come to you tonight not in my professional capacity, but as a private citizen in fear for the safety of this city, and, I confess, for my own life." Holmes leaned forward, his gray eyes gleaming with that fierce intensity I had come to recognize it as the first sign that his formidable intellect was fully engaged. Fear is a powerful motivator, Sir Reginald. Tell us everything, from the beginning. Omit nothing, however trivial it may seem. The barrister drew a deep breath, as though steadying himself against a gale. For the past fortnight, London has been in the grip of a terror the newspapers have sensationally named the Cobblestone Killer. 3 gentlemen, men of substance and reputation, have been brutally murdered in the public streets. Each was struck down from behind with a heavy, blunt instrument, their skulls crushed. The bodies were discovered lying upon the very cobblestones, as though the murderer had melted back into the fog immediately after the deed. There was no robbery. Wallets and watches remained untouched. No apparent motive beyond sheer malignity. He paused, passing a hand across his eyes. The first victim was Mr. Elias Thornton, a wealthy importer of Oriental goods found near his warehouse in Whitechapel. The second was Colonel Archibald Blaine, late of the Indian Army, discovered in Belgravia. The third, only 3 nights ago, was Professor Lionel Graves, the noted antiquarian, close by the British Museum. Holmes nodded slowly. I have followed the reports, though the police have been unusually reticent. There is, I believe, one peculiar detail common to each scene. Sir Reginald started. You know of it already? Yes, a single cobblestone adjacent to each body had been pried loose and removed. The police believe it to be some macabre signature, or perhaps a trophy taken by the killer. And your personal connection to these tragedies? Holmes asked softly. The barrister's hands tightened upon his hat until the brim creased. That is why I am here. I knew all 3 men. We were fellow members of the Athenaeum Club. More than that, we had lately been associated in a financial venture, though that is perhaps relevant. Last night, after leaving the club rather later than usual, I had the unmistakable sensation of being followed. The fog was particularly dense, the streets almost deserted. I heard footsteps behind me, measured, deliberate, keeping perfect pace with my own upon the cobblestones. Twice I turned sharply, but saw nothing save swirling yellow vapor. When I reached my home in Kensington, the feeling persisted. I am convinced that I was intended to be the 4th victim, and that only the lateness of the hour or some interruption spared me. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. M.R. Holmes, I am not a nervous man by nature. I have faced hostile witnesses and difficult cases without flinching. But this unseen menace that strikes without warning or reason, has shaken me profoundly. The police, though diligent, appear baffled. I implore you, will you take the case? Holmes rose and paced the room once or twice, his dressing gown swirling about his lean frame. When he turned back, his expression was alight with that fierce joy I had seen so often when a worthy problem presented itself. My dear Sir Reginald, he said, you have done wisely in coming to me. The case interests me exceedingly. A murderer who strikes respectable gentlemen in the heart of London, leaves no trace save a missing cobblestone, and appears to select his victims from the membership of one particular club. This is no random maniac, but a calculating intelligence with a purpose we have yet to discern. Watson, my glass and tape measure, if you please. We shall begin at once. Sir Reginald rose, relief evident in every line of his figure. Then you will help me? I will help London, replied Holmes with a slight smile. Your safety will, I trust, be a fortunate consequence. Return home now, but take a cab directly to your door and admit no one until morning. Tomorrow we shall examine the scenes of the crimes and interview certain parties. Good night, sir. When the door had closed behind our visitor, Holmes turned to me with eyes blazing. Come, Watson. The game is afoot, and a singularly grim one. Fetch your revolver. We may have need of it before this fog lifts. Chapter 2. The Client's Tale. The fire had burned low by the time Sir Reginald Hargrove composed himself sufficiently to continue his narrative, yet the room seemed warmer for the presence of a case at last. Holmes had resumed his chair, his long legs stretched toward the fender, his fingertips pressed together in that attitude of attentive listening which I knew betokened the utmost concentration. I sat beside the table, pencil in hand, ready to commit every particular to paper. You have given us the outline, said Holmes gently, but I require the details, the small, seemingly insignificant facts which so often prove the foundation of the whole edifice. Pray begin with the victims themselves. Describe each man, his habits, his associates, his recent occupations. Leave nothing out. Sir Reginald nodded gratefully, as though relieved to have a definite task. Very well. The first of all was Mr. Elias Thornton. He was a man of perhaps 55, portly and florid, who had amassed a considerable fortune importing silks, spices, and curiosities from the East. His warehouse lies, or lay, in a narrow lane off Commercial Street in Whitechapel. He was a widower with no children and lived quietly in a house in Bloomsbury. Thornton was a member of the Athenaeum for some 15 years, though he attended infrequently, preferring his club in the city. On the night of his death, December 9th, he had dined at the Athenaeum with several of us, including myself. He left at about 10:30, declining the offer of company, saying he wished to call at his warehouse to inspect a late arrival from Canton. His body was discovered at dawn by a constable on his beat, lying face downward upon the cobblestones of the lane, the skull fractured by repeated blows from some heavy instrument. The missing cobblestone lay immediately beside his head, as though deliberately placed to mark the spot. Holmes' eyes narrowed. And the weapon? The police surgeon believes it to have been a rounded object of considerable weight, perhaps a hammer or mallet. No trace of it was found. Continue, murmured Holmes. The second victim was Colonel Archibald Blaine, a retired officer of the Bengal Artillery. A tall, erect man of military bearing, with a fierce gray mustache and a manner that still carried the parade ground. He had served with distinction in the Mutiny and afterward in the Afghan campaigns. Indeed, Dr. Watson, you may have heard of him, for he was mentioned in dispatches. I confess that the name was familiar to me from regimental talk. Blaine lived in a small but comfortable house in Belgravia, Sir Reginald went on. He was a widower also, his wife having died in India many years ago. He was a regular attendant at the Athenaeum, where he played whist most evenings, and was known for his strong opinions on imperial policy. On the night of December 15th, he left the club at 11 o'clock, again in thick fog. He was found the next morning in a quiet square not far from his home, struck down in the same fashion. Once more, the cobblestone beside the body had been removed. And the third, prompted Holmes. Professor Lionel Graves, poor Graves. He was the youngest of the three, scarcely 45, a brilliant scholar of ancient languages and antiquities, slight in build, with stooping shoulders from years bent over manuscripts in the British Museum, where he held a position of some eminence. He was unmarried, devoted entirely to his studies. Graves was perhaps the most regular of us all at the Athenaeum. He often remained until closing, reading in the library. 3 nights ago, December 20th, he left at midnight. A night watchman saw him turn toward Great Russell Street. His body was discovered at first light near the museum gates. The same dreadful injuries, the same missing stone. Holmes leaned back, a thin plume of smoke rising from the pipe he had lately filled. 3 men, all members of the same club, all murdered within a fortnight, all in fog-bound streets, all struck from behind with the same type of weapon, and at each scene a single cobblestone deliberately removed. The pattern is clear, yet the motive remains obscure. Tell me, Sir Reginald, did these 3 gentlemen share any interest or association beyond the Athenaeum? The barrister hesitated. There is one matter, a financial venture in which we 4 were lately engaged. Thornton, Blaine, Graves, and I had invested together in a company formed to supply paving stones for the new metropolitan improvements. The enterprise was promoted by a Mr. Bertram Hale, formerly a master mason of good reputation. Imported continental stones proved cheaper, however, and the company failed. We withdrew our remaining capital some months ago, leaving Hale in difficult circumstances. He was bitter, I fear, and wrote angry letters accusing us of betrayal. But surely that cannot. Never dismiss a resentment, however slight, interrupted Holmes. Men have killed for less. Yet we shall see. Did any of the victims receive threats? Were there disputes, rivalries, jealousies within the club itself? Sir Reginald shook his head. None that I know of. We were not intimate friends, merely acquaintances who dined occasionally at the same table. Thornton was absorbed in his business, Blaine in his memories of India, Graves in his papyri and inscriptions. I myself have my practice at the bar. Our paths crossed pleasantly, but not deeply. And on the night you believed yourself followed? I left the Athenaeum at 11:45. The fog was denser than I have ever known it. One could scarcely see one's hand before one's face. I walked toward Pall Mall, intending to hail a cab, when I heard the footsteps, steady, unhurried, always the same distance behind. They echoed upon the stones with a peculiar clarity. I quickened my pace. They quickened also. I stopped abruptly beneath a lamp. They ceased. When I turned, there was nothing but fog. Yet I felt the presence, malevolent, watchful. I ran the last 100 yards to a cab stand and did not draw easy breath until I was safe within my own door. Holmes rose and paced the room in silence for several minutes, his brows drawn together in thought. At length he stopped before our visitor. "The affair is grave, Sir Reginald, and promises to be complex. I accept your commission. Tomorrow, Watson and I shall visit the scenes of the crimes and speak with the police. In the meantime, you will oblige me by remaining indoors after dark and admitting no stranger. Should you receive any communication, letter, parcel, message, do not touch it, but send for me at once. Here is my card." Sir Reginald took the card with a hand that still trembled slightly. "You give me hope, Mr. Holmes. I shall follow your instructions to the letter." When he'd gone, Holmes stood at the window, gazing down into the swirling fog. "A singular case, Watson," he said at last. "3 murders linked by club, by method, and by this curious business of the Cobblestones. Yet no robbery, no personal enmity apparent. A madman? Possibly. A calculating avenger? More probably. Tomorrow we shall see what the stones themselves can tell us." He turned away with that eager, almost boyish smile which I had learned to associate with the beginning of a great chase. Outside, the fog pressed closer against the panes, and somewhere in the vast, muffled city, the cobblestone killer waited in the darkness. Chapter 3. Examining the first scene. The morning of December 23rd dawned cold and dismal, with the fog of the previous night lingering like a sullen guest unwilling to depart. A thin drizzle fell, turning the streets into mirrors of dull gray, and the air carried that peculiar London smell of coal smoke and wet stone. Holmes was up before me, already dressed in his long ulster and ear-flap traveling cap, pacing the room with restless energy. "Come, Watson," he cried as I entered the sitting room. "Breakfast can wait. The scenes of these crimes will grow colder with every hour, and I wish to examine them before the police or the public trample whatever traces may remain." Mrs. Hudson provided us with strong coffee and a hasty slice of toast, and within half an hour we were in a hansom cab, rattling eastward toward Whitechapel. Holmes sat in silence, his chin upon his breast, his eyes half closed, but I knew better than to interrupt his thoughts. We alighted in the narrow lane where Elias Thornton had met his end. The place was still marked by a constable on duty, though the body had long since been removed. A small knot of idlers lingered nearby, drawn by the morbid fascination that such tragedies invariably excite. The lane was paved with the familiar rounded cobblestones, slick with moisture, and flanked on either side by high warehouse walls. Holmes dismissed the constable with a nod and a few quiet words, then dropped to his knees without ceremony, producing his powerful lens from an inner pocket. For several minutes he crawled slowly about the spot indicated by a chalk mark upon the stones, examining every inch with minute attention. "Observe, Watson," he said at length without raising his head. "The body lay here face downward, the head toward the wall. The blows were delivered from behind and slightly to the right. See the spatter pattern upon the stones, almost washed away by the rain but still discernible. 3 or 4 heavy strokes, I should judge." He moved to the small rectangular depression where the missing cobblestone had lain. "Now this is curious. The stone was not lifted cleanly, as one might with a proper tool, but prized up with considerable force. See the scratches upon the adjacent stones, made by the edge of a jemmy or crowbar. The marks are fresh, the metal bright where it scraped." He scraped gently at the edge of the hollow with his pocket knife and collected a few grains of soil into a small envelope. Dark loam, rich in humus, quite unlike the clay subsoil of London. This came from a garden or allotment. Note the particles of leaf mold. Our killer brought it with him upon his boots and deposited it here. I confess I could see nothing remarkable in the few specks he indicated. but I had long since ceased to marvel at the acuteness of his vision. From Whitechapel we proceeded to Belgravia, to the quiet square where Colonel Blaine had been struck down. Here the surroundings were altogether different. Elegant houses with pillared porticos, railed gardens, and plain trees dripping in the mist. Yet the pattern was identical. Holmes repeated his examination, crawling upon the wet stones regardless of his trousers, his lens flashing as he worked. The same tool marks, he announced, the same hurried prizing of the stone. And again, garden soil, identical in composition to the first sample. Our man is consistent. The third scene, near the gates of the British Museum, yielded the same results. The drizzle had ceased, but the stones were still damp, and the great classical facade of the museum loomed dimly through the haze like some ancient temple. A few early visitors hurried past, umbrellas furled, casting curious glances at the strange gentleman upon his hands and knees. Holmes rose at last, brushing the dirt from his cuffs with a grimace. 3 identical signatures, Watson. The weapon is undoubtedly the same, a heavy, rounded object, probably a hammer of some considerable weight. The blows are always from behind, suggesting the murderer is both cautious and strong. The removal of the cobblestone is deliberate, not opportunistic. And this soil, always this soil, points to a man who has access to a private garden. He stood in silence for a moment, gazing about him at the empty street. The fog is the killer's ally. Each murder occurred on a night of particularly dense vapor, when sound is muffled and vision restricted to a few yards. He follows his victim at a distance, waits until a deserted stretch is reached, strikes swiftly, performs his curious ritual with a stone, and vanishes. No cry is heard, no struggle observed. A ghost in the mist. As we turned to leave, a familiar ferrety figure emerged from the shadow of the museum railings. Inspector Lestrade, wrapped in a heavy overcoat, his rat-like face peering at us with a mixture of professional jealousy and reluctant admiration. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I might have known you'd be poking about. The Yard is handling this case, you know." Holmes smiled thinly. "And doing admirably, no doubt, Inspector. Yet 3 murders in a fortnight suggest the need for rather more urgency. Have you formed any theory?" Lestrade shrugged. "We're looking for a lunatic, some foreign anarchist, perhaps. There's talk of an Italian cobbler seen lurking near the first scene. Name of Rossi. We've got men searching the docks." Holmes' eyebrows rose. "An Italian cobbler who removes cobblestones? Intriguing. And the soil traces?" "Soil? What soil?" Lestrade looked puzzled. "Precisely," murmured Holmes. "Come, Watson, we have much to do." In the cab returning to Baker Street, Holmes was unusually communicative. Lestrade's foreign anarchist is a convenient scapegoat, but the facts do not support it. The precision of the attacks, the identical method, the deliberate removal of the stones, all speak of calculation, not madness. And this business of the garden soil is the key. A man who walks regularly in a garden, whose boots carry its earth into the streets of London. He lapsed into silence, his eyes fixed upon the passing scene, until we reached our door. "Tonight," he said as we mounted the stairs, "we shall pay a visit to the Athenaeum Club. I wish to see the place where these gentlemen spent their final evenings, and perhaps to learn something of their habits from those who knew them best." Thus ended our first day upon the trail of the cobblestone killer, a day of damp streets and minute observations, yet one which left me with the conviction that my friend had already grasped threads which would, in time, lead us to the heart of this grim mystery. Chapter 4. A second victim. No, a pattern. The afternoon of that same day found us at the Athenaeum Club, that stately edifice in Pall Mall where so many distinguished minds have sought refuge from the bustle of the world. The fog had lifted somewhat, allowing pale shafts of winter sunlight to filter through the high windows of the reading room, but the air remained raw and chill. Holmes, with his talent for assuming whatever role the moment required, had presented himself as a prospective member desirous of viewing the facilities, and I as his guest. The porter, a dignified personage with white whiskers, conducted us through the hushed corridors with grave courtesy. Holmes' eyes, however, were everywhere, taking in the arrangement of the chairs in the smoking room, the positions of the lamps, the worn places upon the carpets where members habitually trod. We lingered longest in the library, a noble apartment lined with books from floor to ceiling, where deep leather armchairs stood in silent rows. Here, murmured Holmes, indicating a cluster of chairs near the great fireplace, is where our victims passed their final evenings. Note the copies of the Times still folded as Thornton left them. See the crease upon the shipping news. Blaine's whist table is that one by the window. The score sheet remains, with his characteristic bold script. And Graves, there is his place, close to the classical dictionaries, with a volume of Pausanias still upon the side table. A club servant, an elderly man with a deferential manner, approached at Holmes' signal. "You knew these gentlemen well?" Holmes inquired. "Indeed, sir. Mr. Thornton came but seldom of late years. The colonel was a regular, every evening almost, for his rubber of whist. Professor Graves scarcely missed a night. He would read until the porter made his final round. And on the nights in question, did anything unusual occur? Any stranger observed? Any disagreement?" The man hesitated. "Nothing that I remarked, sir, save that the fog was uncommon thick each time. The gentlemen left separately, as was their custom. Professor Graves was the last to go on his night. He nodded to me as he passed, same as always. Holmes thanked him with a coin and a word, and we withdrew. Outside in Pall Mall, Holmes paused beneath the portico. No quarrel within the club, then. The common thread remains the membership itself, and that unfortunate paving venture Sir Reginald mentioned. We must learn more of Mr. Bertram Hale. But even as we hailed a cab, fate, or the relentless progress of the murderer, intervened. A newsboy darted past, crying the latest edition of the Evening Standard. Holmes snatched a copy, his face sharpening as he scanned the columns. Watson, another attack. Not fatal this time, but unmistakably the work of our manual. The report was brief, but chilling. A gentleman named Mr. Percival Denton, actuary and fellow member of the Athenaeum, had been assaulted the previous night in a quiet street in Marylebone. He had heard footsteps behind him in the fog, turned swiftly, and caught a glimpse of a tall figure raising a heavy weapon. Denton had cried out and fled, pursued for some distance before his assailant abandoned the chase. No cobblestone had been removed, presumably because the attempt failed, but the description of the method left no doubt. 4 victims intended, then, said Holmes grimly, all connected by the club and by the failed investment. Sir Reginald was right to fear. He is undoubtedly upon the list. The killer is working methodically through the investors who withdrew their capital from Hale's company. In the cab rumbling toward Baker Street, Holmes fell into a profound reverie. I ventured a question. "This Mr. Denton, shall we interview him?" "Tomorrow, certainly. Tonight we have other work. I wish to examine the official reports at Scotland Yard and to speak with Lestrade again. He will be more communicative now that the pattern is unmistakable." At the Yard we found the little detective in a state of considerable agitation. The failed attack upon Denton had roused the authorities at last. Extra constables were being detailed to patrol the streets around the Athenaeum. 4 gentlemen from the same club, Lestrade admitted grudgingly. "It's clear enough now. We pinned our hopes on that Italian cobbler, Rossi, but he was in a doss house and Limehouse the night Denton was attacked, with half a dozen witnesses." Holmes smiled faintly. "I feared as much. Your foreign anarchist theory was always tenuous. Have you investigated Mr. Bertram Hale?" Lestrade looked uncomfortable. "We sent a man round. Hale's a respectable householder in Regent's Park. Small villa, garden, keeps himself to himself since the company failed. No previous convictions. Bitter about the investors, yes, he wrote some warm letters at the time, but nothing to suggest violence. Yet bitterness, Inspector, is the seed from which violence often grows. I should like to see those letters." Lestrade produced them from a file, 3 in all, addressed to Thornton, Blaine, and Graves respectively. The language was intemperate. Accusations of treachery, predictions of ruin, threats of justice in veiled terms. The final one, to Graves, ended with the words, "The very stones will cry out against you." Holmes' eyes gleamed. The very stones. Curious phrase in the circumstances. And Hale's profession, a master mason, accustomed to working with stone, familiar with cobblestones. Still, objected Lestrade. "It's a long step from angry letters to murder." "True," conceded Holmes, "but we have the soiled traces. Remember, the garden earth found at each scene. A house in Regent's Park would certainly possess a garden." We left the yard as dusk was falling once more, and the fog beginning to gather in the streets. Holmes was unusually silent during our return, his brow furrowed in concentration. Back in Baker Street, over a belated dinner, he suddenly spoke. "The pattern is established, Watson. 4 investors targeted, 3 slain, 1 escaped. Sir Reginald remains. The killer will not rest until his list is complete. We must discover whether there were other investors, and we must watch Sir Reginald closely. But more than that, we must find the man whose boots carry that particular garden soil through the London streets by night." He pushed away his plate untouched. "Tomorrow we shall visit Mr. Denton, and then, unless I am much mistaken, we shall pay a call upon Mr. Bertram Hale himself." Outside, the fog thickened again, swallowing the gas lamps one by one, and somewhere in its depths the cobblestone killer moved unseen, his grim purpose not yet accomplished. Chapter 5. Suspects emerge. December the 24th, Christmas Eve, dawned with a hard frost that turned the breath to white plumes and crusted the pavements with glittering rime. The streets were quieter than usual, many Londoners already withdrawn to their homes in preparation for the holiday. Yet for Sherlock Holmes and myself, there was no thought of festivity. We breakfasted early, and by 9 o'clock were on our way to the modest house in Marylebone where Mr. Percival Denton, the latest intended victim, lay recovering from shock. We found him in his study, a thin, precise gentleman of middle age with gold-rimmed spectacles and the neat appearance of one who spends his days among ledgers and actuarial tables. Though pale and evidently shaken, he received us with courtesy and answered Holmes' questions with clarity. I had left the Athenaeum a little after 11, he told us, intending to walk as far as Regent Street in hope of finding a cab. The fog was thick, but not impenetrable. I heard footsteps behind me, steady, deliberate, neither hurried nor slow. At first I thought nothing of it. London streets are seldom entirely empty. But when I crossed to the other side, the steps crossed also. When I paused beneath a lamp to light my pipe, they paused. Then I knew I was followed. "And the attack?" prompted Holmes. "Sudden and silent. I turned into a narrower street, Wimpole Street, I believe, and the footsteps quickened. I glanced over my shoulder and saw a tall figure, muffled in a dark ulster, scarcely 5 yards behind. He raised his right arm, and in the lamplight I caught the glint of metal, a heavy hammer or mallet. I cried out and ran. He pursued for perhaps 50 yards, but I am lighter on my feet than my appearance suggests, and the cry brought a constable from the far end. The man melted into an alley and was gone. Did you observe his face?" "Alas, no." A scarf or muffler concealed the lower part, and the brim of his hat shadowed the rest. But he was tall, 6 feet or more, and strongly built. Holmes thanked him, and as we left, paused on the doorstep to examine the pavement. "No missing cobblestone here, of course," he murmured, "since the deed was interrupted. Yet note the frost. Any soil deposited would have remained visible. There is none. Our man is cautious. He chooses his moment carefully." From Marylebone we proceeded directly to Regent's Park, to the small but respectable villa occupied by Mr. Bertram Hale. The house stood in a quiet terrace, its modest garden neatly kept even in winter, the earth turned and bordered with precision. A maid admitted us, and after a short delay, we were shown into a parlor where Hale himself awaited us. He was a man of about 55, broad-shouldered and powerfully built, with the weathered complexion of one who has spent years out of doors. His hands were large and scarred from years of handling stone, and his gray eyes held a mixture of wariness and defiance. The room itself bore evidence of reduced circumstances. Furniture once good but now shabby, and upon the mantel a row of small cobblestones arranged as ornaments. "Amar, Sherlock Holmes," he said slowly, as though weighing the name. "I have read of you in the papers. You were here, I suppose, about the murders." "Precisely," replied my friend. "You were acquainted with the victims, Thornton Blaine Graves, and with Sir Reginald Hargrove and Mr. Denton." Hale's jaw tightened. "Acquainted, yes. They were investors in my company until they withdrew their money and left me ruined. I wrote to them in anger. I do not deny it. But murder? No, sir. I am a mason, not an assassin. Holmes glanced about the room. You keep cobblestones as mementos, I see. A bitter smile touched Hale's lips. Reminders of better days when honest English stone was valued. Now the streets are paved with cheap foreign rubbish, and men like me are driven to the wall. And your movements on the nights in question? I was at home. My housekeeper can vouch for me. I am no longer welcome in clubs, Mr. Holmes. My evenings are spent here alone. We took our leave shortly afterward, but not before Holmes had contrived to examine the soles of a pair of boots standing in the hall. Heavy hobnails, he whispered as we walked away, and traces of the same dark loam we found at the scenes. Yet the alibis his housekeeper is devoted and will swear to anything. From Hale's house we went in search of the Italian cobbler, Marco Rossi, whom Lestrade had briefly suspected. We found him in a garret off Ratcliffe Highway, a swarthy, voluble little man who protested his innocence in broken English. I work for Signor Thornton, yes, until you say my work too slow, discharge me. But kill. No, signore. I drink grappa that night, sleep in lodging house. Many men see me. His landlady and half a dozen lodgers confirmed that he had been helplessly drunk on the night of the first murder, and in an opium den on the night of Denton's escape. The police needed a foreigner, said Holmes dryly as we departed. Rossi served the purpose until the pattern became too clear. By late afternoon, we had also eliminated two other shadows that had briefly loomed across the case. A French antiquities dealer with whom Colonel Blaine had quarreled, and a German collector whom Professor Graves had publicly accused of forgery. Both possessed alibis of cast iron solidity, witnessed dinners, theater parties, and their footwear bore only the common London mud. Back in Baker Street, Holmes threw himself into his armchair and filled his oldest clay pipe with the strongest shag. The field narrows, Watson. Foreigners, rivals, personal enemies, all eliminated. We are left with the one common thread. The failed paving company and the man it ruined. Hale has motive in abundance, opportunity. He is strong and active despite his years, and the garden soil upon his boots. Yet the housekeeper's testimony, though suspect, cannot be lightly dismissed. We need more. He smoked in silence for some time, then suddenly sat upright. The cobblestones themselves. Hale spoke of honest English stone. The stones he keeps as ornaments, are they from the streets or from his old stock? If the missing stones match specimens from his failed contracts, we have a link. Tomorrow, Christmas Day or no, we shall obtain samples from the scenes. Lestrade will oblige and compare them. He rose and paced the room. But more than that, Watson, we must force the killer's hand. Sir Reginald is the last upon the list. The murderer will not wait long. Tonight and every night until the net closes, we must watch over him. Thus, as the bells of London began to ring for Christmas Eve and families gathered about their hearths, Sherlock Holmes and I prepared to spend the holy night in vigil upon fog-bound streets, guarding one terrified gentleman from the vengeance that stalked him through the darkness. Chapter 6. The Foreign Stranger. Christmas Day passed in a manner far removed from the customary cheer. While the bells of London's churches rang out their glad tidings and families gathered about roaring fires, Sherlock Holmes and I spent the hours in quiet preparation. We dined sparingly in Baker Street, then set out in the late afternoon for Sir Reginald Hargrove's house in Kensington, there to keep watch through the long winter night. The barrister greeted us with evident relief, though his face was drawn and his eyes heavy from want of sleep. He had followed Holmes' instructions to the letter. Curtains drawn at dusk, doors bolted, no servant dismissed. We took up positions in his study, one window overlooking the street, another the small garden at the rear, while Sir Reginald retired early under protest. The fog had returned with redoubled density, swirling in great yellow banks that swallowed the gas lamps whole and reduced the world beyond the glass to a formless void. Sound, too, was muffled. The occasional clatter of a late cab, the distant bark of a dog, the measured tread of a policeman on his beat, all came to us as though from another realm. Holmes sat motionless for hours, his profile sharp against the firelight, his eyes fixed upon the street. I dozed fitfully in an armchair, my revolver upon my knee. Nothing disturbed the silence until, shortly after midnight, Holmes' hand closed upon my arm. "Listen!" From the street came the slow, deliberate scrape of footsteps upon the pavement, measured, unhurried, pausing now and then as though the walker listened in turn. They passed the house once, then returned, halting directly before the gate. Holmes extinguished the lamp and drew me to the window. Through a chink in the curtains we could just discern a tall figure standing beneath the lamp opposite, motionless, muffled in a long coat, the brim of his hat pulled low. For several minutes he remained thus, as though assuring himself the house was asleep, then moved on, his steps fading into the fog. "No attack tonight," whispered Holmes, "but a reconnaissance. He knows Sir Reginald is within and grows cautious. We have alarmed him, Watson, yet he will not abandon his purpose." At dawn we left Sir Reginald with renewed warnings and returned to Baker Street, where a telegram from Lestrade awaited us. Witness reports tall foreigner seen near museum on night of Graves' murder, carrying heavy bag, Polish cobbler, name Kowalski, known to have worked briefly for Hale's company. Address supplied. Holmes' eyes brightened. Another foreigner. How convenient for the official mind. Yet Hale employed many such men when labor was cheap. Come, Watson, we shall see this Kowalski before Lestrade frightens him into silence. We found the man in a mean lodging-house in Somers Town, a gaunt, stooping figure with a pronounced limp. His left leg dragged painfully as he moved. His English was halting but sufficient. "Yes, I work for Mr. Hale 2 seasons only. Good man then, pay fair. When company fail, no more work. I mend boots now in little shop." "And the night Professor Graves died?" Kowalski shrugged. "I drink vodka with friends in public house near King's Cross. Many see me. Then home, limp slow, take hour. Cannot run. Cannot strike quick." He demonstrated his disability by attempting to lift a small stool as though it were a weapon. The effort brought a grimace of pain to his face. "See, leg crushed in quarry accident years ago. Cannot raise arm high without lose balance." Holmes examined the man's boots, worn and patched, the soles thin, no trace of garden soil. We left satisfied that this tall foreigner was yet another blind alley. "The killer wishes to chase shadows," said Holmes as we walked away. "First the Italian Rossi, now this poor Pole, both employed briefly by Hale, both foreign, both easily suspected. Anonymous notes to the police, no doubt, directing attention away from the true source." He stopped suddenly in the street. "But why foreigners at all?" "Because Hale blames imported stone for his ruin. The murderer is using that very resentment as a cloak. He employs foreign labor knowing suspicion will fall upon them, then tips the police when the moment is right. All points back to Hale himself, yet with plausible deniability." In the afternoon we returned to Regent's Park, this time approaching Hale's villa from the rear. The garden was enclosed by a high brick wall, but a convenient tree allowed Holmes to gain a vantage point. For nearly an hour he observed the premises through his glass. "The soil matches exactly," he reported as we withdrew. "Rich, dark loam, heavily manured. And see here." He opened his hand to reveal several small fragments he had collected from the lane outside the wall. Grains identical to those at the murder scenes. Hale walks in his garden daily. The earth clings to his boots. Yet his alibis. The housekeeper is devoted, but perhaps not entirely truthful. We need conclusive proof, something that places Hale himself at one of the scenes. That evening, as we sat over a cold supper in Baker Street, Holmes was more animated than I had seen him since the case began. "The missing cobblestones, Watson, those are the key." Hale spoke of honest English stone. "I have compared samples obtained from the scenes with specimens from his old contracts, preserved in the Guildhall archives. They are identical, granite from a Derbyshire quarry, distinctive veining. The removed stones are not random. They are trophies of the very material he once applied, pried up in ironic vengeance upon the men who abandoned his enterprise." He leaned forward, his thin face alight. "And the weapon, a cobbler's hammer, heavy and rounded, such as a mason might use for dressing stone. Hale has a collection of old tools in his shed. I observed them from the tree. One is missing from its hook. Then we have him." "Not yet." circumstantial only. But tomorrow we shall search that shed properly, with or without Lestrade's warrant, and I fancy we shall find traces enough. Blood, perhaps, or fibers from the victim's coats caught in the hammer's claw. He rose and began filling his pipe. The net tightens, Watson. The foreign strangers were clever misdirection, but the soil, the stones, the motive, all lead inexorably to Bertram Hale. One more night of vigilance for Sir Reginald, and then we shall bring this grim affair to its close. Outside, the fog pressed once more against our windows, thick and impenetrable. But within Baker Street the fire burned bright, and for the first time I felt that the shadow of the Cobblestone killer was beginning to lift. Chapter 7. Footprints and Fibers. The morning of December 26th brought a welcome change in the weather. A keen wind from the north had swept away the fog at last, leaving the sky a pale, hard blue and the streets sparkling with frost. Though the air bit sharply, it was a relief to walk abroad without that oppressive yellow pall which had so long cloaked the killer's movements. Holmes and I breakfasted in silence, each aware that the case was approaching its crisis. When the meal was done, my friend pushed back his chair and reached for his hat. "Today, Watson, we shall obtain the final links in our chain. Lestrade has promised me access to the police evidence, and afterward we shall revisit Mr. Bertram Hale's premises, this time with official sanction. The wind has cleared the streets, but it has also preserved what traces remain. At Scotland Yard we found Inspector Lestrade in better humor than usual. The lifting of the fog had allowed increased patrols, and no further attack had occurred. Yet the little detective was uneasy. The press grew daily more strident in its demands for an arrest. "I've had the chief commissioner on my carpet twice this week," he confessed. "If you've anything solid, Mr. Holmes, I'd be glad to hear it." Holmes laid upon the table the envelopes containing the soil samples from the 3 murder scenes and the fragment he had taken from the lane outside Hale's garden wall. "Compare these under the microscope," he said. "You will find them identical in every particular, particle size, organic content, even the presence of a rare lime compound used by masons to dress stone. Hale's garden is the only source within reasonable distance." Lestrade peered at the specks dubiously, but gave orders for the analysis. Holmes then examined the victim's clothing, preserved in the evidence room. Upon the collars and shoulders of each coat he discovered, with the aid of his lens, minute fibers, coarse, dark wool mingled with particles of grit. "From the murderer's sleeve," he explained. As he raised the hammer, his cuff brushed the victim. "These fibers are from a working man's jacket, navy serge, common among masons. And the grit again, that same lime soil. Most damning of all was a single hobnail impression preserved in soft earth beside the second scene in Belgravia. The square had been newly watered by the street orderly, and the print remained clear. Holmes produced a cast he had taken secretly 2 days earlier from the path in Hale's garden. "Observe the pattern, square nails with the left outer one worn almost flat, identical to the impression here. Hale's boots alone could have made both." Lestrade whistled softly. "It's strong, Mr. Holmes, very strong. I'll get a warrant for the house and garden." "Excellent," replied Holmes. "But we must move quickly. The change in weather may drive our man to desperation. He has failed once with Denton and been balked with Sir Reginald. He will not wait long." By early afternoon the warrant was obtained, and we proceeded to Regent's Park in company with Lestrade and 2 constables. Hale received us in his parlor with a face grown suddenly gray, as though he sensed the net closing. "You again, Mr. Holmes," he said heavily, "and with the police this time." "Unnecessary formality," replied Holmes smoothly. "We require access to your garden and outbuildings." Hale made no demur, but stood silent as we searched. The garden yielded fresh footprints matching the casts exactly. In the small shed at the rear, once a mason's workshop, we found what we sought. Upon a bench lay a collection of old tools, chisels, trowels, and several heavy hammers. One hook upon the wall was empty, but beneath the bench, wrapped in sacking, lay a cobbler's hammer, its head broad and rounded, stained darkly in places where hurried cleaning had failed to remove all traces. Holmes applied a drop of his chemical reagent, and the wood turned crimson in confirmation. "Human blood," he announced quietly. "And see here, caught in the claw, fibers matching those upon the victim's coats. Navy serge, identical to the jacket hanging in your hall, Mr. Hale. Hale sank into a chair, his powerful frame seeming to shrink. "It is over, then," he muttered. But Holmes was not yet satisfied. In a corner of the shed stood a small crate containing 4 cobblestones, 3 already cleaned and polished, the 4th still bearing traces of London grime. "From the scenes themselves," said Holmes, lifting them one by one, "taken as trophies, ironic memorials to the trade your investors ruin. The missing stones from the streets, Mr. Hale, each one a symbol of your grievance." The man raised his head, and for a moment the old defiance flared. "They destroyed me. Honest English stone thrown aside for foreign rubbish. They promised support, then withdrew when profits faltered. I was left with nothing, nothing. The streets paved with my ruin, and they walked upon them without a thought." The stones cried out for justice. His voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands. Lestrade stepped forward. "Bertram Hale, I arrest you for the murders of Elias Thornton, Archibald Blaine, and Lionel Graves, and for the attempted murder of Percival Denton." The constables led him away without resistance. As the door closed, Holmes stood in silence amid the dusty tools, his expression grave. "A tragedy, Watson," he said at length. "A man once respected, driven by resentment to madness. The foreigners he briefly employed were mere pawns, dismissed, then anonymously denounced to draw suspicion away. All carefully planned, yet undone by the very earth upon his boots and the stones he could not resist taking." We returned to Baker Street as dusk fell, the streets now bright with belated Christmas lights. Sir Reginald called later, overwhelmed with gratitude, but Holmes waved it aside. "The credit belongs to observation and logic," he said. "Yet one thing remains, the final confrontation. Tomorrow, when Hale is questioned, we shall hear his full confession. Then the chain will be complete." And so, as the year drew toward its close, the terror that had gripped London lifted at last. The cobblestone killer was in custody. His grim signature explained, his motive laid bare. Yet as I sat by the fire that night, watching the flames dance upon the hearth, I could not help reflecting upon the darkness that may lurk in even the most orderly heart when pride and loss are joined. Chapter 8. The Hidden Workshop. Though Bertram Hale had been taken into custody and the evidence against him appeared overwhelming, Sherlock Holmes was never a man to rest until every thread of a case had been traced to its utmost end. On the morning of December 27th, with London still hushed beneath a thin mantle of frost, we returned once more to the quiet villa in Regent's Park. Lestrade accompanied us, together with a sergeant skilled in photography, for Holmes wished the premises documented in every detail before the inevitable removal of exhibits. The housekeeper, a stout, elderly woman who had served Hale for 20 years, admitted us with trembling hands and tear-stained cheeks. Her loyalty to her master was unshaken. She protested his innocence in broken phrases, but stood aside when Lestrade gently insisted. We proceeded directly to the small brick shed at the far end of the garden, a structure half concealed by evergreen shrubs, its door secured by a padlock that yielded quickly to the sergeant's jemmy. Within, the air was chill and heavy with a scent of damp stone and old mortar. A single dusty window admitted a gray light that fell upon benches cluttered with the tools of a mason's trade, chisels, trowels, mallets, and the accumulated debris of a lifetime's labor. Holmes moved methodically, his lens in hand, examining every surface with minute care. Upon the main bench lay a fine layer of stone dust, undisturbed save for one clear space where a heavy object had lately rested. Beside it, faint traces of the same dark loam we had found at the murder scenes. "Here," said Holmes quietly, "is where he cleaned his weapon after each deed. See the faint scoring upon the wood, made by the claw of the hammer as he scraped away the more obvious stains. And here," he indicated a small tin box half hidden beneath a pile of rags, "is his supply of lime compound, identical to the particles embedded in the soil traces." He opened the box with gloved fingers. Within lay a white powder, coarse and gritty. A quick chemical test confirmed its composition. Lestrade watched with reluctant admiration. "You've built a tight case, Mr. Holmes. The blood on the hammer, the fibers, the footprints, the soil, and now this." You'll hang right enough. But Holmes was not yet done. In a cupboard beneath a bench, he discovered a folded sheet of coarse navy serge, an old working jacket, much mended, its cuffs frayed and darkened with use. Upon the right sleeve, near the cuff, his lens revealed several minute spots that turned crimson under the reagent. The final proof, he said, blood from the fatal blows, transferred as the sleeve brushed the victims in the act of striking. And caught in the weave, tiny fragments of granite dust from the cobblestones themselves. Most poignant of all was a small wooden rack upon the wall, designed to hold specimens of stone. 4 niches were occupied by the polished cobblestones we had seen before, 3 clean to a dull gleam, the 4th still bearing the grime of the street near the British Museum. A 5th niche stood empty, waiting, perhaps, for the stone that would have marked Sir Reginald's death. Holmes lifted the stones one by one, turning them in the light. See the veining Derbyshire granite from the quarry Hale once contracted with exclusively. Each stone removed from the scenes matches this pattern exactly. He chose them deliberately, not at random. They were his signature, his ironic memorial to the trade that was taken from him. The sergeant photographed each item in situ, and we sealed the shed pending removal of the evidence. As we emerged into the wintry garden, the housekeeper approached Holmes hesitantly. "Sir," she said in a low voice, "I know what you found. I've seen him come in late these past weeks, his boots heavy with mud, his face set like death. I knew something terrible weighed upon him, but I never dreamed. He was a good master once, before the company failed. Those gentlemen, they promised him everything, then left him to beggary. It turned his mind, sir. He spoke of nothing but the stones night after night." Holmes regarded her with something approaching compassion. "Resentment is a slow poison, madam. It may sleep for years, yet in the end consume the heart entirely. Your loyalty does you credit, but justice must be served." We left the house in silence, the wind sharp against our faces. In the cab returning to Baker Street, Holmes spoke but once. "The workshop reveals the man, Watson. A place of honest labor turned into a chamber of vengeance. Every tool, every speck of dust, every stone upon that rack tells the story of a mind unhinged by perceived betrayal. He planned carefully, employing foreign workmen only to dismiss them and later direct suspicion toward them with anonymous letters. He waited for the fog, followed his victims from the club, struck swiftly, and took his trophy. A ritual of retribution performed with the precision of the craftsman he once was. And the attempted murder of Denton? A deviation forced by desperation. The pattern was broken when Denton escaped, but Hale could not abandon his list. Sir Reginald would have been next, had we not intervened. Lestrade parted from us at the corner of Baker Street, clutching his parcel of evidence. "You've done the yard a service again, Mr. Holmes," he admitted gruffly, "though I'd be glad if next time you bring us in a little earlier." Holmes smiled faintly. "The official force works admirably within its lights, Inspector, but sometimes a case requires the freedom to follow even the smallest grain of soil to its source." Back in our sitting room, with the fire crackling and Mrs. Hudson's tea restoring warmth to our hands, Holmes filled his pipe and stretched his long limbs toward the fender. One chapter remains, Watson, the confrontation in the prison cell, where Hale will unburden himself fully. Men of his sort often find relief in confession once the mask is torn away. Tomorrow we shall hear the story from his own lips, and the chain will be complete. I could not help reflecting, as I watched the smoke curl toward the ceiling, upon the strange and terrible paths that human passion may take. A hidden workshop in a quiet garden, tools of creation turned to instruments of death, and 4 cobblestones upon a rack, the silent witnesses to a tragedy born of pride and ruin. Chapter 9. The trap is set. Though the evidence against Bertram Hale was now formidable, Sherlock Holmes harbored a deep-seated aversion to resting upon circumstantial proof alone, when a more direct demonstration was possible. On the evening of December 27th, after our return from the hidden workshop, he sat long by the fire, his brows drawn together in profound thought, the smoke from his pipe curling upward in thin blue spirals. At length he roused himself and turned to me with that keen gleam in his eye which betokened decisive action. "We have the man, Watson. Yet I should prefer to take him in the very act. The evidence is strong, but a jury of Englishmen is slow to convict upon traces of soil and fibers alone. Let us give Hale the opportunity he seeks, one final chance to complete his grim catalogue. Sir Reginald shall walk the streets tonight as bait, and we shall be the snare. I confess the plan filled me with unease. Is it not perilous? Man is desperate and has already killed 3 times. Holmes smiled grimly. Desperate men are careless men. With Lestrade and his constables in the shadows, and you and I close at hand, Sir Reginald will be in no real danger. The fog has lifted, but darkness will serve our purpose well enough. Hale has been released on police bail this afternoon. Lestrade agreed to the stratagem most reluctantly, but he sees the value of an incontrovertible arrest. Sir Reginald, when the proposal was put to him in his Kensington home, displayed a courage I had not expected in one so lately terrified. Pale but resolute, he declared himself willing to play his part. I owe you my life already, Mr. Holmes, he said quietly. If this will ensure that no other man suffers as my friends have suffered, I am ready. The arrangements were swiftly made. At 10 o'clock that night, Sir Reginald left the Athenaeum Club by the main entrance, his usual hour and route. He walked slowly toward Pall Mall, his tall figure unmistakable beneath the gas lamps. Unseen by him, Lestrade and 2 plainclothes constables followed at a distance on the opposite pavement. Holmes and I, revolvers in our pockets, kept pace some 20 yards behind our client, melting into doorways whenever he paused. The streets were quiet, the festive bustle of Christmas over, the cold night air driving most citizens indoors. We passed through Pall Mall and into St. James Square, then turned toward Regent Street. Sir Reginald's step was steady, though I knew his heart must be pounding. For nearly half an hour nothing occurred save the echo of our own footsteps and the occasional rumble of a passing cab. Then, as we entered a narrower street off Piccadilly, dimly lit and almost deserted, Holmes gripped my arm. Behind us, crossing from the square, I glanced back cautiously. A tall figure in a long dark ulster had appeared at the corner, moving with deliberate pace in our direction. He kept to the shadows, pausing whenever Sir Reginald paused, advancing when he advanced. There was no mistaking the purposeful nature of the pursuit. We allowed the distance to close gradually, drawing the follower deeper into the trap. At length, in a particularly secluded stretch where the lamps were spaced far apart, the figure quickened his stride. Sir Reginald, obeying Holmes' earlier instructions, turned into a narrow court flanked by high walls and apparent cul-de-sac that was in reality a police ambush. The pursuer followed swiftly. As Sir Reginald halted as though uncertain, the man closed the gap in 3 long strides. His right arm rose, and in the faint light we saw the dull gleam of the heavy cobbler's hammer. Now, cried Holmes. We sprang forward together. I seized the upraised arm while Holmes caught the man about the body. He struggled with surprising strength, snarling like a cornered beast, but Lestrade and his constables were upon us in an instant. The hammer clattered to the stones, and the prisoner's hat fell away, revealing the weathered features of Bertram Hale. You have ruined me, gentlemen, he gasped as the handcuffs clicked upon his wrists. Your cheap foreign stones took my livelihood, my good name, everything. I only sought justice, the justice of the stones themselves. His voice broke into a bitter laugh that echoed strangely in the narrow court. Lestrade led him away to the waiting cab while Holmes retrieved the hammer, wrapping it carefully in his handkerchief. The final link, he said quietly, taken red-handed with the very weapon that struck down 3 men. No jury in England will hesitate now. Sir Reginald joined us, trembling but unharmed. It is over, then, he whispered. Truly over. Truly, replied Holmes. Return home now, sir, and sleep soundly. The shadow upon the cobblestones has been lifted at last. We watched the police cab disappear into the night, then made our own way back to Baker Street. The streets were empty, the stars sharp overhead, and for the first time in many days the great city seemed at peace. In our sitting room, over a glass of whiskey and a pipe, Holmes reflected upon the night's work. A desperate throw, Watson, but successful. Hale could not resist the opportunity we offered. His obsession was too strong. Had we relied upon the evidence alone, clever counsel might have raised doubts. Now there is none. I could not help asking the question that had weighed upon me throughout. And if he had not followed? If caution had prevailed? Holmes smiled faintly. Then we should have arrested him tomorrow upon the accumulated proof. But I judged the man correctly. He was driven by a force stronger than prudence. Resentment, long nursed, becomes a madness that will not be denied. He leaned back, his eyes half closed. One more visit remains to hear his full confession in the cold light of day. Then the case of the Cobblestone killer will be closed forever. Outside, a distant church clock struck 2, and London slept beneath a frost-clear sky, freed from the terror that had stalked its streets these many nights. Chapter 10. The Final Deduction. On the morning of December 28th, with London still wrapped in the crisp silence that follows a hard frost, Sherlock Holmes and I made our way to Newgate Prison, where Bertram Hale had been lodged since his arrest 2 nights before. The sky was a clear, pale blue, and the sun glinted upon the ice puddles in the streets. Yet the cheer of the weather seemed mockery in the face of the grim errand that lay before us. Inspector Lestrade met us at the gate, his sharp features betraying a mixture of professional satisfaction and genuine regret. "He has asked to see you, Mr. Holmes," said the detective. "Spent the first day silent and sullen, but yesterday evening he grew calmer and said he wished to make a full statement on condition that you are present to hear it. I've taken down what he has already admitted, but he insists the whole tale must be told to you." Holmes nodded. "I expected as much. Men who commit crimes of this deliberate nature often desire, in the end, that the full measure of their ingenuity be appreciated. Lead on, Inspector." We were conducted to a bare interview room, lit by a single high window. Hale sat upon a bench, his powerful frame hunched, his once defiant eyes dulled by exhaustion and defeat. The prison pallor had already begun to settle upon his weathered face, and his hands, when he raised them to gesture, trembled slightly. Yet when he saw Holmes, a flicker of the old pride returned. "So, Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he said heavily, "you have run me to earth at last. I knew you would. It was only a question of time. You are the one man in England I feared." Holmes seated himself opposite, his attitude calm and attentive. "The evidence was conclusive, Mr. Hale. But I am here to listen, not to judge. Pray tell us in your own words how this tragedy came about." Hale drew a long breath. "It began with ruin, slow, respectable ruin. I had built a good business upon honest English stone. My company supplied half the new paving in the metropolis. Then came the fashion for cheaper continental granite, Belgian, Norwegian, Portuguese. The municipal contracts went elsewhere. Thornton, Blaine, Graves, Hargrove, Denton, they had invested with me, promised loyalty. When the tide turned, they withdrew their capital to save themselves, leaving me with warehouses full of unsold stone and debts I could not meet. My credit gone, my name dishonored, my wife dead of grief within the year. I was reduced to this." He indicated the cell with a bitter sweep of his hand. He paused, staring at the floor. "For time I accepted it. But night after night, walking the streets, I saw my own fine Derbyshire granite being prized up and replaced with foreign rubbish. The very cobblestones seemed to mock me. Then the idea came, a justice of my own making. Those 5 men had walked upon my ruin without a thought. Let them lie upon it in death." Lestrade stirred impatiently, but Holmes raised a hand for silence. "The planning was simple," Hale continued. "I knew their habits from the old days. They still dined at the Athenaeum most evenings. I waited for the fog, nature's perfect cloak. I followed each in turn, struck from behind with my old cobbler's hammer, heavy enough and silent. Then I prized up one of my own stones, the very granite I had once applied as a signature. A trophy, proof that the stones themselves had exacted vengeance. And the foreign workmen?" prompted Holmes gently. A grim smile touched Hale's lips. "Clever, was it not? I employed a few, Rossi the Italian, Kowalski the Pole, knowing the police would leap at any foreigner. When the time came, an anonymous note was enough to direct suspicion. I thought it would shield me long enough to finish the list." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Denton's escape unsettled me. I struck too soon in poor light. And then Hargrove grew cautious, stayed indoors. I watched his house on Christmas night, but sensed danger. When he walked again 2 nights ago, I could not resist. I thought the police interest had waned. Foolish. Holmes nodded slowly. The soil from your garden, the fibers from your sleeve, the distinctive boot prints, the matching cobblestones, all betrayed you in the end. Obsession leaves traces a careful man would have avoided. Hale shrugged. Perhaps. Or perhaps I wished, deep down, to be stopped. The thing became a madness. Each stone upon my rack brought no relief, only the need for the next. He fell silent, and for a long moment the only sound was the distant clang of prison doors. At length he raised his eyes to Holmes. "You've bested me fairly, sir. I bear you no grudge. Tell Hargrove and Denton, tell them I am sorry for the fear I caused them. The others, they have their justice now, such as it is." The interview concluded, we emerged into the bright winter sunlight. Lestrade walked with us as far as the street. "A full confession," he said with satisfaction. "The case is ironclad. He'll stand trial in the new year, but there's no doubt of the verdict." Holmes walked in silence for some distance, his hands clasped behind him. At length he spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. "A sad affair, Watson. A man of ability and former worth, destroyed by resentment nursed too long. Greed on the part of the investors, pride on his. Together they bred this monster. Let it serve as a warning. The seeds of vengeance, once sown, grow in darkness until they choke the soul itself." I could find no words to reply. We returned to Baker Street, where the fire burned bright, and Mrs. Hudson had prepared a simple luncheon. Sir Reginald called in the afternoon, his face alight with relief and gratitude, but Holmes waved aside his thanks. "The streets of London are safe again," he said simply. "That is reward enough." As evening drew on and the lamps were lit along Baker Street, I sat by the hearth reflecting upon the case. 3 lives taken, a 4th and 5th threatened, all for the sake of stones beneath our feet, cold, inanimate things that yet became symbols of a burning wrong. In the annals of crime it will stand as one of my friend's most singular achievements, not for the brilliance of the deduction alone, but for the somber lesson it carries, that even in the most orderly society, beneath the veneer of respectability, there may lurk passions as deadly as any savage instinct. Holmes himself, stretched upon the sofa with his violin across his knee, drew from its strings a low, melancholy air that seemed to echo the sadness of the tale. Outside, the cobblestones gleamed in the lamplight, innocent now of the shadow that had so lately walked upon them. Thus ended the adventure of the cobblestone killer.